what happened to Shangri-La Frontier? It's one of the biggest manga for Weekly Shonen magazine, and the anime's been amazing. But you wouldn't know that because nobody talks about this series. Obviously, there's fans on Twitter and Reddit, but outside of the hardcore fans, I never see anyone talking about it. Which doesn't make sense because it gets views. The manga is doing well, the official videos online get views, there's an AMV with 12 million views, and it's the third most popular anime on Crunchyroll. So if you haven't heard of Shangri-La Frontier, then you're probably interested in why everyone seems to like it, and if you are watching it, then you're probably wondering why nobody talks about it. Which is why, in this video, I'm going to talk about the anime and manga for this series, compare it to other popular anime this season, and discuss whether Shangri-La Frontier is really worth the hype. Although you can't really call it hype when nobody is talking about it. So let's start right there. Now, the first time I heard about this series was when my friends recommended the manga. They said, dude, if you like video games and fantasy, then you need to check this out. So it wasn't long before I checked it out, and admittedly, I fell in love with this manga right away. If you're not familiar with the story, it's about a kid who goes by the username Sunraku. Sunraku usually plays broken games, but he picks up the hot new MMO Shangri-La Frontier, and it's like going from 720 resolution to 4K. He drops in the game and has fun with the skills and mechanics and instantly finds his own unique scenario. Yada yada yada, now he teams up with his friends because they gotta beat the 7 god tier bosses of the game that all have unique quest lines and conditions. I'll put it this way, back when I started this series a few years ago, I was kinda all set with RPGs. I was very turned off by AAA companies and the way everything had to be open world and cinematic and game of the year. But then I read this series and I was reminded of classic games like Darksiders 2, Destiny, and Skyrim. I remembered the simple joy of picking up a game, discovering the new world, learning the mechanics, and falling into the story and its characters. Shangri-La Frontier made me fall in love with games all over again, and it's because it's the most accurate depiction of the fun of playing video games there is, whether you're playing new shooters, relaxing single-player games, or broken fighting games from over 20 years ago. On top of that, Shangri-La Frontier also delivers its own story. It places Sunraku in a world with its own engaging world building and a story that is built through the in-game quests, as well as the gameplay between the players. Fast forward to the later chapters and you find yourself in a story that isn't just about video games, but is a genuinely engaging story that's full of world building, politics, and tons of insane action. And the manga sales only seem to reflect how great the series is doing. Actually, real quick, just before I get into that, make sure to become a channel member if you're enjoying this video. You get exclusive perks like custom emojis and badges, and you can even pick which series I cover next. But like I was saying, if you look at the number of volumes printed, it's easy to tell just how well Shangri-La Frontier is doing. According to an Oricon article back in December, Shangri-La Frontier has over 10 million volumes in circulation. That places it in the same tier as some of Shonen Jump's best series like Dandadan, even though it's in Weekly Shonen magazine. Now, I don't have an exact figure for sales, but 10 million units after 20 volumes is pretty good. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is only supported by the number of views the anime is getting. At the time I'm recording this video, Shangri-La Frontier is the third most popular anime on Crunchyroll. That's halfway into season 2, and not to mention on a Friday, almost a full week after the last episode. Right now it's only behind Solo Leveling, one of the most watched anime this season besides Sakamoto Days on Netflix. And if you go over to YouTube, the Crunchyroll videos don't always get a ton of views, but they do get consistent views. In fact, the first opening for the anime has over 2 million views, and that AMV I mentioned, posted by the official artist Fathoms, has 12 million views, and that same artist's AMV for the second opening has 10 million views. That's almost as much as the Black Clover OP, which has 16 million views. So clearly people are watching this show, and not only are they watching it, but there is engagement online. But as you may have noticed, honest, there isn't a whole lot of discussion for this series. I mean, you kinda have to go out of your way to find posts about Shangri-La Frontier outside of the marketing. And even if you go on Twitter and search, you get a lot of posts like not seeing tons of noise, Shangri-La Frontier isn't talked about enough, or you're all sleeping on Shangri-La Frontier. Mind you, these are all recent posts from mid-January. So why is it that the manga is doing great and the anime is getting a ton of views, but all of these viewers don't really talk about the show? Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of reasons for it, but this clearly seems to be an example of manga influence, or lack thereof. And here's what I mean. So the Shangri-La Frontier manga is doing well in general, but let me ask you this. Can you name 5 popular content creators or online personalities that cover this series? Probably not. So what's probably happening is because the usual accounts aren't talking about this series, nobody with a ton of influence is really pushing it. Because of that, there's a lack of discussions being pushed, which is why you kinda just get random tweets from fans. And to drive this point home, let's look at some numbers. So the Shangri-La Frontier Reddit has 17,000 members. Dawn has 194,000 members. Gachi Akuta, from the same magazine, already has 16,000 members, and its anime hasn't even come out yet. And then if we look on Twitter, Gachi Akuta's community has 1.3 thousand members, Dawn's has over 27,000, but Shangri-La Frontier doesn't even have a community. Evidently, while Shangri-La Frontier is just as popular as these other series, and gets a ton of views, those same fans just aren't that active. And in the case of Twitter, are practically non-existent. And again, a large part of this is because there's nobody with a ton of influence pushing the anime or pushing people to talk about the manga. So what you're left with is purely just the Shangri-La Frontier manga fans. So why is it that casual fans aren't very active and manga fans seem almost non-existent? I think that becomes pretty clear when you look at which series are ahead of Shangri-La Frontier. So for example, I already mentioned Dawn. Now Dawn has a couple of things going for it. Tatsu worked for Fujimoto, that's one thing. Another thing is discussions prior to the anime. They weren't that big, but there were plenty of videos from people pushing the manga well before the anime was announced. And then when people finally saw the anime, not only were they interested in the action, but even more people liked the romance element. So it had something going for it prior to the anime, and there's multiple selling points that resulted in a massive mainstream audience. The same is true for Solo Leveling. It was years ago, but back in the day, Solo Leveling was one of the most reviewed series on YouTube. Before everyone got banned for even mentioning the title, but still, it was a big deal. And now, obviously, it's the most watched anime on Crunchyroll, and it even got its own movie. But Ouji, I'm sure you'll say. Solo Leveling is kind of about video games, basically. Shouldn't Shangri-La Frontier be just as popular? Well, besides the fact that you already had a ton of people pushing the anime before it came out, there's actually a very simple difference between the two series. If you follow seasonal anime, then you know anime about fantasy or video games or isekai are practically like a disease. We get about a dozen of them every season. This is different from the days of Sword Art Online, where video game anime and isekai were still fairly new. Like, I remember watching Sword Art Online back in the day and being like, wait, so you're telling me he's in the video game? Whoa. And now every other show is like, I'm in a video game with my stepsister, but she's really a spider. And also, I'm only allowed to parry. But that's the thing. Because there's so many series like this, you need that gimmick to separate yourself from everything else. Solo Leveling has that gimmick. Solo Leveling is kind of about video games, sort of. but it has the unique premise of having video game mechanics in the real world and using them to fight fantasy monsters and discover mysterious quests. Meanwhile, Shangri-La Frontier is purely just about video games. Like, objectively, the entire story is, hey, here's this kid, he plays this one kind of video game until one day he starts this mainstream video game, and then you watch him play this video game. It's like the evolution of people going from actually playing games to watching other people play games online, to now we have anime about other people playing games. Bottom line is, Shangri-La Frontier is kind of a niche series. It doesn't have the romance appeal of something like Dandadan. It doesn't have a gimmick like solo leveling. It is just about video games. So it really only appeals to gamers, which is an ever-growing demographic, but in an industry that has hundreds of series like that, that's not really enough to stand out. And you also have to consider that it's not a weekly Shonen Jump manga, so it doesn't have the marketing of, say, My Hero Academia or Sakamoto Days. So obviously Shangri-La Frontier isn't boring, otherwise it wouldn't be in the top 3 on Crunchyroll, and also get millions of views on YouTube. But when nobody is talking about it, and the fans seem almost non-existent, I think it's a simple matter of a fandom not unlike Dr. Stone's that loves their series, but would rather talk about bigger series like One Piece or Kagurabachi or whatever. So is Shangri-La Frontier overrated by its fans? Absolutely not. In fact, it's been one of the best anime for over 2 years, and it's one of my favorite ongoing anime. The only reason I haven't caught up on the manga yet is because I love being surprised with each new episode. And like I said, if you love video games as much as I do, there's no doubt in my mind that this will be one of your favorite new anime to watch. And that's why, even though nobody talks about it, Shangri-La Frontier will continue to be one of the most watched anime in the industry. But now I'd like to hear your thoughts. How would you describe Shangri-La Frontier? What was your first impression? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. Also, don't forget to become a Shonen Ouji channel member. You'll get custom emojis and badges, you get to pick which series I cover, and you can even get credited in future videos. Also, check out my other Shangri-La Frontier video, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.